The U.S. tax code is now longer than the Bible, War and Peace, and the Power Broker combined. The U.S. tax code, including regulations, is approximately 75,000 pages long, 9,834 numbered sections. Many of those sections are outdated. Some reference industries that no longer exist. The document keeps growing anyway. That 2,600-page figure only counts the statutes. Add IRS regulations and revenue rulings, and the full body of tax law reaches roughly 4 million words. That's the system on paper. Americans collectively spend 7.1 billion hours every year preparing and filing their taxes. That's every person in the United States working a full week simultaneously on paperwork. The compliance burden, the time, software, and professional fees required just to follow the rules, costs Americans $414 billion annually. Not taxes paid, just the cost of calculating the taxes. So, how does a tax code reach 4 million words? The answer isn't chaos. It's the opposite. Every single line was added deliberately by someone for a perfectly reasonable purpose. With a simple idea, allow people to deduct mortgage interest. Reasonable. Homeownership has social value. The deduction passes, one paragraph added. The code grows by one paragraph. Then, someone asks, which mortgages qualify? Primary residences only, or second homes too? What counts as a home? A houseboat? A trailer? Each question generates a definition. Each definition generates an exception. Now, a constituency exists. Homeowners, builders, lenders. Each group has an interest in how the rule is written. Each has a representative. Each representative has an amendment. This is the mechanism. Every deduction is a constituency. Complexity isn't a design flaw. It's the residue of 1,000 perfectly reasonable exceptions, each one sponsored by someone who needed it. The federal income tax was introduced in 1913. The original statute fit in a few dozen pages. By 1954, a comprehensive overhaul, the Internal Revenue Code of 1954, added hundreds of new provisions and restructured the entire statute. By 1986, another overhaul simplified it. After every simplification, the code rebounds, because simplification removes someone's exception. And that someone calls their representative. The incentive to add always outweighs the incentive to cut. The IRS doesn't just enforce the tax code, it also interprets it through regulations and revenue rulings. The agency is, in effect, writing law continuously, filling gaps the statutes left open. That 4 million word total isn't one document. It's a layered system. Statutes from Congress, regulations from the IRS, and revenue rulings that clarify specific situations. Each layer adds words, none of them subtract. Take the dependency exemption, the rule that lets you reduce taxable income for each qualifying dependent. On paper, straightforward. In practice, it's one of the most frequently misapplied provisions in the entire code. To claim a dependent, you must satisfy a relationship test, a residency test, an age test, an income test, and a support test. Miss one, and the claim is invalid. This is the system working exactly as designed. The IRS is expected to collect nearly $5 trillion in taxes. The compliance cost adds $414 billion on top of that. A hidden tax, paid not to the government, but to the system itself. Some of the code's complexity exists to limit benefits for high-income taxpayers. The phase-out, the income threshold, the alternative calculation. Each one is a sentence, often a paragraph. The alternative minimum tax was introduced to ensure wealthy filers paid something. It's a parallel tax system. You calculate your taxes twice, then pay whichever is higher. Twice the complexity by design. A common misconception worth correcting. Many Americans believe that filing for a tax extension also extends the deadline to pay. It doesn't. The extension covers the paperwork. The payment was due in April. File late on payment, and the IRS charges interest plus a failure to pay penalty. The terminology is genuinely confusing. That confusion is itself a product of the system's design. More than 80% of Americans believe the federal tax code should be easier to understand. That's a rare consensus. And yet the code keeps growing. The gap between what 80% of people want and what the legislature produces isn't a mystery. It's the system functioning correctly from the perspective of everyone who has an exception they need to keep. The mortgage interest deduction has survived every simplification attempt since 1986. Not because it's irreplaceable, because the constituency that benefits from it is organized, funded, and present. There's an industry built on this complexity. Intuit, the company behind TurboTax, reported over $20 billion in revenue in a single recent fiscal year. H&R Block processes tens of millions of returns annually. Simplification isn't in their interest. The complexity is the product. The code is so dense that the IRS publishes thousands of pages of guidance explaining what the code means. The document requires a companion document. The companion document requires its own updates. Technically, this is called governance. This isn't unique to taxes. Any system that accumulates exceptions without a mechanism for removal will expand indefinitely. The Dodd-Frank Act, passed in 2010 to regulate financial markets, ran to over 2,300 pages at enactment and has generated thousands of pages of follow-on rules since. The tax code is simply the most legible example because it publishes its own word count. The structural incentive is asymmetric. Adding a provision rewards a constituency. Removing one creates an enemy. In that environment, the rational move for any legislator is to add, never subtract. 6.5 billion hours. That's the annual cost of decoding a document nobody designed to be readable. Those hours aren't recoverable. They're the price of a system that grew by accumulation rather than intention. One exception at a time, one constituency at a time, compounding for over a century. Every decade or so, a reform proposal promises to fit the entire tax code on a postcard. The 1986 Tax Reform Act came closest. Within 10 years, the exceptions had returned. Within 20, the code was longer than before. That stack of pages, taller than War and Peace, isn't a monument to confusion. It's a monument to organized interests. Every page is someone's exception. Every exception has a sponsor. The audit finds no villain, just incentives. The tax code will keep growing until the cost of keeping an exception exceeds the benefit of having it. Until then, pay your taxes by April 15th, not October. The extension only covers the paperwork. This audit is complete. The findings, as always, may be ignored.